We're about 7 minutes late, but a few of us are from the humanities, so that's kind of how we do things. I'm Dr. Ogler. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of history, as well as an associate professor at MountStVincent. And along with Sister Fagan, just under 4 years ago now, we set up a speaker series, a series of discussions about issues of social justice. The first of these was in February of 2017, and it was a reflection on the elections of 2016, which, as we all remember, brought us a new president, who I'm sure will be named before the meeting is out, but I just can't bring myself to say the name. Ever since then, every semester we ask a few faculty who are experts in all sorts of fields to come and join us and say a few words about an issue of importance to social justice in America in the current moment. This semester we decided to do something a little different. As you're probably aware, we're in an election year again. The elections of 2020, no matter what happens, are going to be a really important moment in American history. As a historian, I'm really glad I will probably never have to teach them, because by the time they become history, I will be long since retired. But they are nonetheless really important, and we need to think about them as they are going on, not just after they've taken place. So to that end, we've asked these nice people to come and give us some tips on what we should be thinking about, what we should be keeping in mind as this election comes up. And that's really the subject of tonight's event. A couple of things. First, I am going to ask that everyone, even the students in the room, and I know this is hard, you know the phones you own? They have off switches. Use them. Can you please turn off your phones if you haven't already done so? And if they ring during anyone's talk, I do reserve the right to pick them up and say hi. I like doing that. They're fun to talk on. I also am going to ask that if you have questions, you hold them to the end of the presentations, when we will have time for questions and discussion. We're going to begin with the co-director of this series and the professor of religious studies, Sister Fagan. We'll then continue with Dr. Vincent Fitzgerald from the Communication Department, Dr. Kristen Lawler of the Sociology Department, and Dr. Joshua Schmickler of the Philosophy Department. I'm going to basically do nothing, as long as everybody sticks to their allotted time. And if they don't, I guess I have to do something. I don't know why. Sister Fagan, please.
Thank you all for coming, and we all look forward to this presentation. We are a little less than 9 months away from election time. On November 3rd, we will go to our polling places and cast our vote for the person who will lead our country for the next 4 years. It is our time to exercise our right and responsibility as citizens of this country to state who we want as our leader. None of us on this panel is here to tell you whom to vote for, but we're here to shed some perspective on where we are now in our country and the issues before us. For the last 44 years, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has published Faithful Citizenship, a teaching document on the political responsibility of Catholics. There are many good things in the document, but it seems to me that it is time for something new. I say this because even the bishops proved unable to offer a new version of this document. The last one, largely revised in 2007, and a little updated in 2015. There were disagreements among the bishops about the issues at stake. To some bishops, abortion is the preeminent issue. To other bishops, there are other life and death issues besides abortion. I will say more on the life and death issue later. What the bishops come up with is not a revision, but at the end of their document, they added Pope Francis' supplementary sources. Considering how much effort the bishops have devoted to this document, it seems that Catholics have gone in their own direction. As we look around at our world and the role Catholics, and I might add other Christians, have played in fueling a polarized political climate, this now seems to be a good time to rethink how we engage with politics as faithful citizens from the ground up. In fact, we are obliged to do that. What is politics? The question is simple. We use the word all the time. The best way I would define politics is what the people share in common. This is how Catholic social teaching understands politics. Too often when we say politics, we mean partisanship, taking sides in a divisive conflict. But narrow self-interest is the opposite of what politics really means. When we misuse the word, we are depriving ourselves of the best hope we have against narrow self-interest. A sense that politics calls us out of ourselves towards something greater. We are called to a common good morality. If our politics even is going to be something more than a football game, it calls on all of us to bear witness to real alternatives, a different way to think about politics that focuses on the common good instead of endless conflict. We must recognize that we share the community with everyone, and everyone belongs to the community. We can and must dialogue with those who disagree with us. If we do not listen to one another, how are we really going to hear and see the issues that are before us, let alone fix them? In the end, politics is a service to others and enables citizens to achieve their fulfillment. We cannot afford to spend our energies on partisanship. We are living in a very charged time. Our country is in a critical state right now. We are living in life and death situations. Many people are living in fear and looking for hope for their future. We have immigrants, those who are undocumented, afraid that they will be taken from their schools, work, or homes and deported. Our elderly wonder how they will manage their health care benefits if there are cuts. Our workers can hardly survive in our unjust capitalistic system where the benefits go toward the upper levels of the working class. Our poor wonder, will they survive in our system or become, as Pope Francis says, the excluded and the throwaway of our culture? The lives of our African American brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Hispanic brothers and sisters are all in danger, as we have seen over the past few years with the rising white supremacy and neo-Nazi groups' violent attacks. And lastly, our criminal justice system, which is so broken, needs a great overhaul because it is so filled with discrimination. Are these not life issues that call us to be accountable for? Should we not be concerned about these issues as citizens of this country? We pride ourselves on being a welcoming, caring, and moral country. But one would have to question this as we have seen many people's lives put into a dangerous situation because of the lack of compassion on the part of many in authority who choose to stand on the side of the powerful. One Catholic theologian, in responding to a recent book on immigration, said the American Catholic population has never been more divided, half rooted for Trump, I'm afraid Dr. Opler mentioned, one half rooted for Trump and half for Hillary Clinton. How did our divisions become so deep and bitter? Yes, there is a lot in history that would shed light on that question. And yes, we need to deal with our history, but not get sucked into it. Our past must be dealt with if we are able to move toward common ground in the future. Where will we go to make sense that we are getting honest information that will inform us properly so we vote intelligently? Listen to news stations and read newspapers that give reliable and honest information. For the students here, your professors can help you in this area. We must be people where truth matters, not fake news. Where truth reigns, then life is possible. Human beings will flourish. Where fake news reigns, deception and death reign. So a population of people who feed on falsehood will disappear and the country will destruct itself. The common good cannot exist in an environment of dishonesty. Life will only thrive in an environment of acceptance and compassion. We are all in this project together, making America generous, empathetic, respectful, accountable, and truthful. I conclude here with Bryan Stevenson's words, Bryan who wrote the book Just Mercy. And he states, "We are all implicated when we allow other people to be mistreated. An absence of compassion can corrupt the decency of a community, a state, a nation. Fear and anger can make us vindictive and abusive, unjust and unfair, until we all suffer from the absence of mercy and we condemn ourselves as much as we victimize others. We all seek mercy, and we all need justice, and perhaps we all need some measure of unmerited grace." Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vince Fitzgerald from the Communication Department. When I was first asked to present today about why this election matters, it occurred to me that every presidential election matters. Every once in a while, I will hear from people who will say all politicians are the same, but they're not the same. No more than all college professors are the same, or all plumbers are the same, or all lawyers or electricians are the same. Whose president matters. It affects us in every way. It affects our tax structure, our finances and economics, environment, student loans, education, and ultimately whether we decide to go to war or not. So this is an important election, but all presidential elections are important. I thought that what I would talk about today is how this relates to my field of communication and the media, and particularly the news media. And most of us will never meet the president, any president of the United States. Most of us will never hear a president speak in person or a candidate speak in person. Most of us will never even see any of the candidates running for president. So that lends to the question, well, how do we make our decisions? how do we determine which of our leaders we should be voting for? And really, you come down, there are a few ways, but there really aren't that many real popular ways. And the first is the media. We hear about our leaders and our prospective leaders through the media. And for those who don't hear through the media, they're probably hearing from word of mouth. But even the word of mouth, the people they're hearing it from, they're hearing it from the media. It's a two-step flow of communication, where it comes from the media to a smaller group of opinion leaders who then disseminate the information to the larger public. As a result, I think many people will argue, many people in my field will argue, that while the media serve various functions, for most Americans it's an entertainment function, for the media themselves it's an economic function, one of advertising, but really I think many of us would argue that its highest calling is one of being an information source. It's providing relevant information to us so that we can choose our leaders, and after they are elected, that we can keep an eye on them and on our government. As far as several of the things, I'd just like to mention one of the things that Sister Eileen just referred to, and which what I thought, Sister, was just a beautifully written piece. And that's the concept of one of the things we hear about a lot today is fake news. Now, coming from the perspective that I'm a media critic, and I teach a class called Media Criticism, and I wrote a book that is very critical of television news and how they cover presidential campaigns. I still want to address the entire concept of fake news and how it is presently used in our society, and that it is used in our society mainly to indicate that the media or the mainstream media are purposefully putting out false and misleading information. So I went back and I took a look at some research, most of which I was familiar with, but some new things as well. As far as when you're really talking about fake news, what people are talking about is bias in the media, that they're favoring one candidate, one political ideology, one political party over another. And there was a very relevant study, 2017, by the Gallup organization, of all people. And what Gallup was trying to find out, and what they were arguing, ultimately, which I think is a valid argument, is that when you're looking at bias through the news, and we hear a lot of people accusing news organizations of bias, that they're looking at it through their own prism, through their own filter, that they're looking at it actually through their own bias. So the 2017 study that Gallup did is they asked a number of people, I forget the exact number of people, it was a large number of people, and they showed them a piece of news and asked them afterwards in a survey, do you think, besides getting demographic information on the people, do you think this was biased? And the overwhelming majority of the respondents said that they did not find the material biased. They then gave the same exact article to another group of people who were demographically identical, almost identical. And for these people, they included the source where it came from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, from MSNBC, from Fox News. And not quite in as large numbers, but 50% of the people then said that the material was biased. And the people who thought it was the most biased were the people on both sides of the political spectrum who were the most extreme. The first, at like 44%, 43 or 44% of people who define themselves as extremely conservative Republicans found the material biased. The second group, just a shade behind, not even a full percentage point behind, was the group that considers themselves extremely liberal Democrats. The people who were most polarized found it the most biased. The people who found it the least biased were the moderate independents. So we always, when we accuse, or you hear people accusing the media of bias, and sometimes there is bias, it does occur, although I'll get to the other research in just a moment. So while it does occur, it is not nearly as pronounced as many people tend to argue. That leads to a second piece of research, which indicates that while the argument far predating President Trump, going back 40 years, arguing that there was a liberal bias in the media, research has indicated that that has been overstated, that it actually is not. However, in order to do this, again, the researchers have to take themselves out of it. I think in that case, one of the questions as we hear about bias and fake news now is why would bias occur? And sometimes it can occur not purposefully, but just because reporters are human, and reporters are working on deadline, and reporters make mistakes. The important thing is, if reporters make mistakes, do they then correct those mistakes after the fact? One of the common criticisms as to why reporters, and there's a liberal bias, tends to come from the belief, and it is an accurate belief, that most reporters in the news media vote Democrat. That is true. That is a fact. However, their personal belief then has to filter in to their reporting. And research indicates that that just is not happening to the extent of the criticism that is sometimes occurring. And I think the other thing to take into consideration is while the reporters tend to be liberal Democrats, the people who really make the decisions at the top, the people who own and run corporations, are the opposite. The corporations are multi-billion-dollar transnational corporations, Warner Media, formerly Time Warner, News Corp, Disney, Viacom. These are inherently conservative organizations. So when you take a look at liberal reporters, but conservative ownership, it actually leads to the conclusions that research has found, that it tends to be fairly balanced. And you also have to ask yourself, whenever you're looking at any type of a structure or of a company, there are several questions you have to ask. How is the company organized? How is it financed? How is it structured? And that tends to be by conservative organizations. The point, again, is not that the media are liberal or conservative, but that most reporters, and again, remember, I'm a media critic, are trying to do a good job in reporting. They are trying to do their best. One final thing that I'd like to identify, since most of my work has been in the area of polling, as we look as students and as just citizens, as we look at the coming, next 9 months of the campaign, it seems like it's been going on for 2.5 years already. Actually, I think it has been going on for 2.5 years. But as we look at the next 9 months, and we take a look, if you're interested in the horse race elements, which is the polls and who's winning and who's losing, and this is again where people have accused the polls of being inaccurate and having some type of bias. I'm never really certain why people would expect that, why pollsters would risk their own reputation and their company's financial well-being to slant a poll one way or another. But for those of you who are interested in the polls and looking at them, there's 3 things I think you should be looking at as we progress in the months. First, and we should have learned this in 2000, we definitely should have learned it after 2016, but beware of national polls. We do not elect presidents based on a national popularity contest. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by almost 3 million votes. It didn't matter. Al Gore beat George W. Bush by 500,000 votes. It didn't matter. Even now in the primaries, it is not a national primary. It is 50 individual elections or caucuses. And in November, it will be 50 separate elections electing members to the Electoral College. So try not to pay too much attention to national polls. And incidentally, I will stick up for the pollsters in 2016. They received an enormous amount of criticism. They were not wrong on a national level. In the 2 days prior to Election Day, 3 of the most reliable polling organizations, ABC, CBS, and NBC, had Hillary Clinton defeating Donald Trump. One had it by 3 points, one by 4 points, one by 5 points. She won by 2.1 percentage points, well within what is known as the margin of error. The problem was they were reporting on the national popular election, which means nothing. They need to focus on individual states. Second thing to look at, I was looking at this morning. There was a new poll this morning. I've already forgotten, there's so many polls were already inundated by, I think it was ABC, Washington Post. But take a look at the margin of error. The margin of error, polls are not exact. And also remember, polls do not predict. Polls are snapshots in time. They tell you what's going to happen today, not what's going to happen 9 months from now. But look at the margin of error. A good poll should have a margin of error of about 3%, which means if it shows that Donald Trump's approval rating is 46%, what they're really saying, if it's a poll with a margin of error of 3%, is that it's really within 3% either way of 46. It could be 43, it could be as high as 49, 46 being the midpoint. Some of the polls that I've been seeing in the last few days have margins of error of 5.5%. That's way too high. What it means is they didn't sample, they didn't interview enough people. Those become more unreliable. When they put the graphics on the television screen, generally at the bottom of the screen they'll put the margin of error, plus or minus. You want to look for a poll that's about 3%. Above 4 starting to get sketchy, above 5 is really sketchy. I saw one within the last few months that had a margin of error of plus or minus 9%. There's a word for that in polling, it's called garbage. It means absolutely nothing. Third thing, and this is almost never publicized, take a look at the methodology. Each pollster samples people differently. If you look at right now, and again, there's no reason to, but they will look right now at how each of the individual Democratic candidates would stack up against Donald Trump in November. Well, it's actually today, because it's a snapshot in time. On a personal one-to-one national race. There were 2 polls that came out, ABC and Emerson College in Boston, and they were quite markedly different. Emerson had the margin far closer than did ABC. And that's because ABC was looking at, if you read the small print, the media are not going to tell you about this, you have to search this out. ABC was sampling registered voters, anybody registered. And they found out that when that happened, the lead was larger. Emerson was looking at likely voters. So they would call people on the phone to interview them, and also are trying to determine how likely those people are to vote. You can also look at other things. Pollsters weigh things differently. They will use a different percentage of Democrats, a different percentage of Republicans, a different percentage of independents. The reason they do that, there are more Democrats in the country registered than there are Republicans. So different polling organizations will use different formulas for that. The point is, finally, at some point we do have to trust our institutions. The media are not perfect. I can come up with numerous reasons as to how, or numerous solutions as to how the media could improve their campaign coverage of presidential campaigns. But at some point, we do have to trust that while they can still improve, that in many cases, they are not purposely trying to mislead us. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody. I never really talk about electoral politics in my classes, so I want to be really brief because I'm actually most interested in hearing about where the students are at and kind of what you guys are thinking and what your questions are. So I'm going to be pretty quick. I just have a couple of points that I thought I would make. They asked us, the panel, the organizers, asked us to come and talk a little bit about what we think the stakes are of this election. And obviously, for everybody on all sides, the stakes feel very high. This is a very heightened kind of a moment. And from the perspective of sociology as opposed to, for instance, political science, we don't look at the electoral stuff exactly as much as the way that broader social forces, movements, power politics, stuff like that are sort of translated, how they show up basically in electoral politics. So that's sort of the tack that I take. And in terms of what the stakes of this election are, they're similar in some ways to last time. And I was looking over my notes from the last panel that we did after Trump was elected, and the points that I made were just that although it felt so sort of unprecedented and new and different and oh my God, what happened, and no one believed that this was going to happen, that a lot of the, especially sort of politics of racial revanchism that I think characterized the Trump campaign and a lot of the ways that he has governed, this idea of sort of white people kind of taking back territory that they lost, either, this is a long story in American history, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, all the way through. That kind of politics seemed like probably the most dangerous aspect of the Trump presidency, but also the most typically American. They didn't seem so unusual to me that kind of politics would have we've seen very intense anti-immigrant kind of moments, very intense moments of racialized scapegoating and stuff like that in the United States. And so during the Trump presidency, I've sort of always felt that way. In the face of a lot of discussion of the idea of Trump as being kind of almost like this alien, like they sent him over from Russia somehow. Like to me, Trump is like this profoundly American character, he's a combination of a kind of regular Republican class warrior with this kind of fool's gold populism, carnival barker stuff. He just seems very American to me in a lot of ways, politically and in terms of the style and stuff like that. But I think that there's something different that's happening in this election, and that is of greatest interest to me in terms of the kinds of power politics and social movement politics that I think are most interesting and that I see electoral politics as sort of a reflection of, and in terms of those divisive, dangerous racial politics. And that's really what's happening in terms of the Democratic Party and a potential realignment in the Democratic Party. And a realignment around the issue of public goods. I think that there's nothing more important in this election and in the Democratic primary than thinking about the split in the Democratic Party. To me, the pivot is between, on one side, uncompromising public goods, things that are for everyone, that benefit everyone. And on the other side, one or another notion of like means testing and maybe yes for the lowest down and maybe a little bit for the middle but nothing for the top. Uncompromising public goods is something different. My kids go to New York City public schools, for instance. They both, I can afford to send them on the subway with, my son graduated, sorry, sometimes I forget, he's in college. But they went, and my daughter still does. They get free Metro cards. Every New York City public school kid gets handed a Metro card when they go to school. Those who can afford to pay for their own Metro cards, and those who can't. And you know what? That's a really great thing. Because it's just about what we prioritize, that we think it's important that all kids get to school. More recently, there's now free lunch for every kid in New York City. Not only for the ones who are poor and can't afford it. And you could, there's a million examples of this. Like my free library, I can afford to buy books, but I go to the library because it is a public good, it's free for everyone, it's something that we decide together that we value. And to me, that's the pivot on which everything within the Democratic Party, anyway, right now, the splits in the party, I think that's really what the axis is that's most important. You could say, well, it's no fair that my kids get a Metro card, but the thing is, it's important that they do, because it creates solidarity among all people of New York City. It's important that every kid in New York City gets a free lunch, because they deserve it, because we want nutrition for kids at school. This is the idea of public goods. And within the Democratic Party, this is the first time, I think, in a very long time, that the notion of pure, uncompromising public goods is on the table. I would argue it's potentially, since there's been a couple iterations of the Democratic Party in the 20th century anyway, right? You've got the New Deal coalition, the transformation of the New Deal coalition out of the civil rights movement, because there was a problem with the New Deal coalition, which was that it purposely excluded blacks in the South and Latino domestic workers, and that was a problem with the New Deal coalition. The civil rights movement pushed the Democratic Party to abandon the white elites in the South in favor of voting rights for blacks in the South, and so you had, in the late 1960s, a transformation, during all of the 1960s, but a transformation in that coalition. I think that what it was the New Deal coalition, it was FDR that was arguably, I think, the last time we looked at real public goods for everybody. Medicare, Social Security, the kind of things that are unassailable, almost unassailable in this country, because you cannot use racial resentment, you cannot use class resentment to attack policies that benefit everyone and that make everyone's life better and that we all can support. So I think we are looking, right now, the split in the Democratic Party is between those who would realign the party around public goods, around a renewed New Deal and civil rights coalition, in a way like the best of both without the abandonment of, because the New Deal protections didn't actually, they didn't apply to domestic workers or foreign workers, and that was very racialized, and it was to get the South on board and stuff. So I think that we could potentially be looking at a realignment of the Democratic Party around public goods, around a new coalition that really could represent a multi-ethnic, multiracial, working class coalition, and actually move the party away from representing one section of the elite to actually being a party that represents the interests of the working class of this country, which is not white. It is white and black and brown and Asian. It is heavily female. It is, it is a very diverse coalition, working class coalition. I think that the notion of public goods became, in terms of thinking about Trump and the Democrats, became so apparent to me. Every semester, I teach a class in a prison, upstate, in a different prison every time. But the first time I did it, I went into the prison, and I drove into this town in upstate New York, very far away, really nothing there that's very good, a lot of desperation, a lot of poverty. You drive in and there's nothing, giant Walmart and a giant prison, and that's the town. And that, I don't know, I never grew up going to places like that. This is like, Ohio America looks like that, right? So, for me, it's walking into that prison with a bunch of highly educated, elite white folks from New York City who are coming to bring free education to largely African-American, convicted murderers, many of them, right? And walking right by the prison guards, the white prison guards, and not noticing them, I mean, of course I was, but and thinking like, oh, your education is not of particular interest to any of us, right? And they see that we don't care that their kids can't afford to go to SUNY because SUNY costs $20,000 a year, right? So this is what, I have so many moments like this where I think like, this is why free public higher education is so incredibly important, because the kind of elite, coastal liberal, African American, all of these very divisive racial and class politics, not to mention the fact that if you look at who elected Donald Trump, it was people without higher ed. I mean, that was a big piece of the explanation of why Trump was the president. Or look, the poorly educated. All the smarty pants made fun of him for saying that. But it was actually incredibly meaningful, what he had to say, because he knew that he was appealing to a bunch of people who knew that liberal coastal elites, I'm sorry, I hate to use that kind of language, but it's kind of real, didn't care if they had college educations or not, and didn't advocate for that. This is one among many, single-payer health care, Medicare for all, as a public good. For me, why is America so much more brutal than other highly industrialized, wealthy countries? I think living in a country where if you're rich, you live, and if you're poor, you die when you get sick, that's pretty brutal. And so I actually think that so much of the racially divisive, the ugly, the alienating, the really nasty stuff in American life and American politics, the notion of public goods is absolutely the antidote. Not to mention, the ultimate public good, like air you can breathe and water you can drink. Like the billionaires will be okay when all that's, gone. They'll just have their own little oxygen tanks or whatever that they'll buy themselves on their little islands. But the rest of us actually need those public goods and should be advocating in a totally uncompromising way for them. Okay, so the last thing I just want to say about electoral politics in general, and it should not be a surprise to anyone what side of the split in the Democratic Party I am hoping wins. Because I think that's actually the winner in terms of the general election too, 100%. I have no doubt of that. We already ran this experiment. What happens if you run a centrist Democrat against Trump? We already know, like it just happened. We already know what happens when we do that. The Democrats lose. That's what happens. It just happened, right? Or what happens to centrist Democrats that don't have the charisma of Barack Obama? Well, during the Obama years, the Democrats did nothing but lose, but it looked like they were winning because everybody loved Obama. An unusually, a singularly charismatic character. It wasn't the centrist policy, it was the, Obama, and everybody loved Obama. The last thing I just want to end with is the reason the other reason that I think this election is so interesting is because I think that what the part of the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders campaign that is pushing for public goods and pushing to move the Democratic Party away from representing a sort of centrist moment and into being a broad coalition like FDR style working class politics. The reason that I think that it's so important that this is happening right now is also because if people are organizing together and start to understand how to act together as one, it almost doesn't matter who is the president. My favorite example of this, so to me, the movement building that is happening around this election is far more important than whoever gets in necessarily, because you don't just get the policies that someone is advocating for. It's not like, oh, I'm president, now I can sign this, and now we can all have all the things that we want. No, it is a struggle. It's a power struggle. There was a moment recently in the past, I forget, year and a half or so, when Trump was, shut down the government basically in order to get the border wall, right? In order to fight for the border wall, federal workers were not getting paid. And when it came around time to about the second paycheck that they weren't going to get, the air traffic controllers and people around the air industry started sticking out and stuff like that. Sarah Nelson, who is the president of the Flight Attendants Union, made an announcement. She made a little speech and said, well, I think that if this doesn't stop, federal workers are going to start having to have a conversation about a general strike. Within 12 hours, Trump was in the Rose Garden crying uncle. That was it. He said, okay, sorry, never mind. You know what? We'll get the border wall some other way, but I'm going to start paying you guys right away. Immediately. And all she did was say, and also people were engaging in wildcat strike activity. That's power. You need to be able to build that. She didn't just say it. Anybody who heard it knew that that was not an idle threat. What is most important, I would argue, about political organizing, it's probably clear what I'm for, what I think is interesting, what I think is important. Whatever you're organizing for, whatever you're for, the important thing to understand is that it's the movement building that happens in these moments. The ability of people to get together and to figure out how to act collectively in their own interests. That's what makes real change. And it doesn't matter who is the president necessarily, unless you have that potential power. And so that's sort of how sociologists tend to look at this stuff, like the power relations that underlie the electoral stuff. In this case, I think what's sort of most significant about this election is that there's actually organizing for social movement power going on at the electoral level, which is very unusual. That has not happened for a very long time. So that's why I think the stakes are very high. It's very anxiety-provoking, but I think these are really exciting times, and I think this is a very exciting election. So.
I'm Josh Schmickler. Excuse the voice, I still have a slight cold, I can't seem to get rid of it. All right. Sister Eileen said that she wasn't going to tell you who to vote for. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm going to tell you who not to vote for. When this event was held last time, I talked about Article 2 of the Constitution and what the role of president is. And I said that Donald Trump did not meet the qualifications. Didn't seem to know what someone who held the supreme executive position in this country needs to know. My position hasn't changed, just had more evidence. So far as I understand it, there's two real roles that the president plays. The president is the head of state. That is a symbolic representation of what this country is and what the country stands for. The president is also the head of government, the chief executive, right, of the United States, someone in charge of enforcing the laws and protecting the country from foreign threats. On the first point, the head of state. Well, one thing I wasn't expecting from Republicans until Donald Trump was to have someone who openly praises dictators, He openly praises Kim Jong-un, who oversees one of the most brutal, cruel, horrific, terrifying violations of human nature ever seen. His country is basically a concentration camp. To be buddies with this guy, to like this guy, to affirm this guy, to speak enviously of this guy's power is outrageous in a head of state of a free people. His relationship with probably the most dangerous person in the world at this time, Vladimir Putin, is equally horrifying. Somebody who has no problem seizing territory that is not his at the point of a gun, and someone who has been corrupting his country's political system since he's taken power. Maybe open racism is a long-standing tradition in American history, but it hasn't been the MO of most American presidents when I've been alive. Trump's comments that there were good people on both sides of the Unite the Right protest and counter-protest, made after a white supremacist had murdered a woman and maimed many people in the crowd, were completely shocking to me. That he would think there are good people on the side of people who are openly advocate violence against African Americans, Jews, Muslims, people of color, immigrants, is really shocking in a country that has been working painstakingly, suffering, towards the greater sense of giving every person in it the natural rights to which they are entitled. That this guy would say there are good people on the side of people who are interested in changing this country into a white supremacist nation is completely shocking to me. I have to be rather summary on this. Another outrage, I think, was Trump's authorization of the separating of undocumented immigrant children from their parents, which both he and members of the administration said was done with the intent purpose of scaring people from coming to this country. Absolutely morally outrageous. This is not a symbolic representation of our values as a country. If that was it, I guess I wouldn't be so worried. You can survive a bad head of state. There have been all kinds of junky British monarchs who are heads of state and not heads of government. We can get over their craziness or immorality or the fact that they don't seem to understand any of the principles of the country that they're supposedly representing. But I think Donald Trump has also failed in an extraordinary way as head of government. His open encouragement of Russians to meddle in the United States election, and his willingness to not see this as a problem so long as it personally, politically benefits him. He's completely failed to understand what the role of someone who enforces the law is in this country. Someone who withholds military aid that's sanctioned by Congress in an attempt to get the Ukrainian president to investigate a political opponent for personal political gain. It's absolutely outrageous. Firing government officials after they testify to crimes we have committed in Congress is absolutely outrageous. Refusing congressional subpoenas for documents, refusing to give testimony, all it's been done by an American president before, puts you in the same league as someone like who ended up having to leave office because they refused to follow the law. I spent a few summers ago studying the basic setup of the government. Looking at the political philosophies that were behind its creation. And two people are really important to come to mind. One is British philosopher John Locke, the other one French philosopher Montesquieu. I looked at how their ideas and how they influence the Constitution, the Declaration, the Revolution. One of the things that Montesquieu says, and it strikes me as really important, and this is why we should care about our votes, is that the heart and soul of a republic, what makes a republic, is the people's votes. If the system of voting is corrupted, if it is influenced by a foreign power, if it doesn't actually exist, the republic is gone. This is also, by the way, the reason that you should vote. This is your voice. Even within this country, where things are very unfairly shared, I think that's a good point. Places where more people vote, where more people are active in the political process, have to expend a lot less energy to defend their rights, and a lot less afraid of their government. This is your say in the system. This is something some people have fought and died for. This is something that some of your ancestors who refused this hoped for and prayed for the day when they would finally get a chance to have franchise, to get to have a say in who governed them, to stop being a slave. This is something that's extremely important. It's important not to forget. It's important to be involved in. This election matters. And I've watched what happened with this impeachment. And we are in an era of, I think, near unprecedented partisanship. And I've been shocked. It's not completely new that the Senate would dismiss all of the charges against Donald Trump without hearing any witnesses. But the fact that this was done when people are taking oaths of office to hear the evidence and render just decision, terrifying. That the Senate in the past few years refused to even take a vote on a president's Supreme Court nomination. Merrick Garland, who was put forward by Barack Obama, was not even voted on. The traditional way you handle this is, of course, is vote down somebody, even if they would be a legitimate candidate. That's the power you got. No, we'll just not refuse to even consider a vote on this person, and we'll hold out so we can get the Supreme Court there. It's terrifying. And what's deeply upsetting to me is the aftermath of this, what we're seeing right now. Because in the wake of this, in the wake of this evidence coming up, in the wake of this debacle of a trial in the Senate, Donald Trump seems, I don't know if the polls are correct, but he seems more popular than he's ever been. And to watch the Democratic candidates fighting each other and name-calling at each other, fighting over the future of the Democratic Party. There's not going to be a future of the Democratic Party if the court is entirely full of Republicans, if the Senate is full of Republicans, if gerrymandering allows them to control all or as many as possible of the state legislatures. This is not the time to care about that much about the future vision of a party that is not able to hang on to almost any power in this country. It is time to stop this person who seems to know almost nothing about our sacred traditions, about our commitments, about what we believe in, about the very document that he has sworn to preserve and protect, who openly violates it, who openly brags about violating it. Use your votes. That's what you got. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. I was very impressed, and at one point in time I agreed with every single one of you, so something's wrong. But we're gonna throw open the floor to questions now. I have plenty, but I'd much prefer to get them from people who haven't participate.
Questions, comments, complaints, red security?
One thing I said, I got the message very clear from you. I just wanted to know, what do you think about the candidates who are arguing we need a little bit more gradualism in our approach so that we and maybe Dr. Fitzgerald was about the middle of the country isn't going to all of a sudden go get a single payer health. They're not all of a sudden going to do this and that. Do you think there's any logic in that strategy for the centrist Democrats? What do you, in terms of, well, that's not, it's got to be clear vision or else we're not going to defeat. What do you think about that logic?
I mean, my sense of the American electorate is that they respond to boldness and that Democrats, as Republicans like, has not been a winning strategy. And I feel like there's also this kind of like fiction of this grand center in the United States that I'm very skeptical of. I think actually the crashing and burning of Biden as the front runner certainly has something to do with his performance has not been great. But the idea behind Biden as the front runner, which seemed plausible to me certainly for a time, was that okay, he might not be my favorite, but like probably all of them will like that because and there's always this sense of not like what do you want, but what do you think those other people might want? And I don't think that that's necessarily been a winning strategy. For me, the evidence is really that during the Obama years, the Democrats lost, 1,000 seats or something all around the country. State house after state house, so much political power was eroded during that moment. In the wake of, because I mentioned there's the New Deal coalition, and there's the sort of the civil rights movement transformation of the Democratic Party and sort of the breaking up of some of the New Deal coalition. And then in the wake of really the historic defeat of the left and the labor movement, you have the DLC, Democratic Leadership Committee or whatever they were, like the Clinton arm of the Democratic Party, which was let's remake the party. So the same thing happened in Britain, Tony Blair. Let's remake the party in the interest of this kind of, centrism. And I think it's sitting ducks for the right, ultimately, because to me the record shows that. I think like I said, I think we have a very clear, very recent example of what it looks like when a centrist Democrat runs against Trump. We lose the Electoral College. I think that if you look at, some of the margins in those states, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, there were lots and lots of voters that stayed home, and that really had a lot to do with Trump becoming president. And part of why they stayed home was maybe it was considered, you look at Flint, Michigan. What happened in Flint, Michigan on Obama's watch? An entire city was poisoned. And Obama, I'm not trying to slag on Obama necessarily, but he came to, it wasn't like, the Army Corps of Engineers was called in and they pulled up all the pipes and then he came and he drank the water and he said it was okay to drink. The idea that those people are going to turn out for something that doesn't materially affect their lives in one way or another is, I think, a fantasy. The other thing is, I think that strategy, instead of trying to turn out black voters in Philadelphia, in Flint, Michigan, in Detroit, in Wisconsin, the traditional Democratic coalition, within centrism is this notion, and within this notion of electability is that we can take certain constituencies for granted, the left, the labor movement, civil rights, stuff like that. And then really what we want to go for are like these kind of white people in the suburbs or the exurbs or something like that. And that's kind of what the centrist sort of thing is about. And I don't think that that's been a winner for Democrats.
Can I just comment? I think your position of we ran Trump against the centrist Democrat, we know what happens, is not entirely accurate. I think what we're found to look at is Trump ran against a centrist Democrat who was incredibly unpopular. People in this country did not like Hillary Clinton. It's that, and on top of that, she was an awful candidate. In the last 2 weeks of the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump, it might be 3 weeks, made 81 campaign stops. 81 campaign stops. Hillary Clinton made 32. She took it for granted. Even her selection of a vice president, Tim Kaine, who I'm sure is a fine guy, if she had selected someone who could have turned out the vote more, if her vice presidential candidate had been Cory Booker, you would have seen the turnout in Detroit, in Milwaukee, and in Philadelphia increase. She would have won those states and she would have been in the White House.
But I think that's a centrist move. Tim Kaine was a attack to the center. I mean, I hear what you're saying about the personality of Hillary Clinton, but the choice of Tim Kaine as opposed to somebody who would have turned out black voters in Philly and Detroit was precisely a centrist moment and not about her as a candidate.
I view it as a Clintonian a moment. I mean, where the Clintons, everything had some type of a calculation to it, and generally for them. Yeah, I mean,
I hear what you're saying.
it's just, we can't just, and you may be right. I'm not saying you're wrong. Because anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen in November is wrong. If people say that Bernie Sanders can't win, which is the popular position right now, that he will be the nominee and that he will go down, which is why Donald Trump can't wait to run against him, are the same people who said that Donald Trump couldn't win. So the days of predicting who can be elected and who can't, and what electability is and isn't, those days are gone. Things have changed. So we don't know what is going to happen. But Hillary was such a terrible candidate that has to be part of the equation.
We also have to add in here the evangelical vote, because that also was a big factor for Trump. And a conference that I attended in January brought that out again. The findings are that the evangelical vote is still out there for Trump, and that could very easily lead him toward the White House again.
Well,
because of the abortion issue. The whole thing is the abortion issue.
The question will be, do they turn out or do they not turn out? Because they're certainly not going to vote Democrat.
No, they're not going to vote Democrat. But what I'm saying is that because that was a big factor for Trump also, big number there in evangelicals, which people were rather surprised at.
And Republicans always turn out.
Yeah.
Their levels of turnout are far higher and more consistent than Democrats.
I'm curious, what accounts for that? Is it just purely age, or are there other factors?
I think it's age, and I think it's a couple things. I think it's class, right? I mean, the higher you are on the class level, the more likely you are to vote. Republicans tend to be up there. I mean, the voter participation rate among Republicans is like so high. But I do think it also has something to do with the messaging of Republicans and traditionally more centrist Democratic messaging. I think that Republican messaging is like, you better get out and vote or they're gonna take your guns or something. And the Democrats are a little more like, please vote so that HR 575 doesn't get an amendment attached to it. I do think that there's something, and that's what I mean, like Americans sort of respond to boldness. And I know that might be distasteful to some depending on what the message is, but I think that there's an urgency around in the messaging of Republicans to their base and to Americans that I don't see there as much, at least traditionally, in Democrats. But that's, I don't know.
I know before when you were talking about media, you were talking about television, newspapers, but so many people get their information now from Instagram, Facebook. I mean, I don't think that television and newspapers have half the effect that unsourced communication has. And while we can look at whether Fox or MSNBC are biased, you know, how do we begin to look at all the other information we get, especially when we're in a system where someone tells a lie and keeps telling it, and then someone else repeats it. And so whether it's conspiracy theories or just lies become reality.
That's an excellent point. That's a tremendous point. And that Facebook has made it clear that they're not going to do anything about it. And I think one of the things that people forget when they talk about ideology, and I'll always argue that the true ideology of the media is money. That's what they're interested in. They love controversy. They love to make money, and they'll go wherever it is. And you know, look at how they're taking glee in kicking Joe Biden when he's down, because it's controversial. It's good for ratings. So that's really, and Facebook is an example. It's an excellent point. And maybe the technology has just grown too fast. You know, we have the media I'm talking about, where they don't know how to handle it yet. I mean, we've seen that with newspapers. Print newspapers are dying, and they still haven't come up with a proper model as to how they're going to save themselves online. I mean, the company that owns the Miami Herald and the Kansas City Star just filed for bankruptcy. So they just need a new model for a new financial model and economic.
I mean, one of the things I'm worried about with respect to some of this is maybe people vote based on their party commitments or what they think they're going to get from the government, but I'm worried it's actually far less than that. I think many people vote on who they like to have a beer with, who's taller, who's more handsome, who makes them feel better. Donald Trump, you can say whatever you want about him. This guy is a master of manipulating the media as it currently operates. He knows how to get people's emotions moving, and he knows how to get eyeballs on him. And even though he speaks like a third grader some of the time, he calls them names like a 5-year-old. This seems to work really well for a large portion of angry people who live in the states that are in play, that it could go either way, that it determine who's winning. I don't know if policy decisions at all. I think the decision of Barack, your point of Barack Obama's charisma was what got him elected. I think it was the reason George W. Bush was elected. He had a different kind of charisma, appealed to a different kind of person. And I think Donald Trump has a charisma, and he's a TV showman, like you said. And I look at the field of the Democratic challengers, and none of them have the charisma. And I'm worried about that, because I think this guy's dangerous to the Republic.
Yeah, I think in the absence of, most Americans don't vote super ideologically. I heard Chris Matthews, I don't know why I was looking around, and he said, most people don't care about policy. They just want it. It's just who you want to see on TV every night or something like that. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that in the absence of, people feeling like they're part of a movement or something better. And I do think what we're seeing, at least in the Sanders campaign, is that is growing, right? It is actually, people are making phone calls and knocking on doors. There's an army of volunteers. People are really talking to one another and getting beyond that spectator sport kind of thing. Now, I don't know what will come of it, but I think the only thing that could potentially transform that, because that is true. What did Bush and Obama have in common? People liked them. They wanted to have a beer with them. And yeah, there isn't necessarily anything.
Have a conversation.
I want to have a beer with Bernie, but I don't think most people feel that way.
Other questions? If there aren't, I have a quick speech, I promise, which is, please vote. I don't honestly know what I'm going to tell my son in 10 years or 15 years when he's old enough, 20 years, when he's old enough to ask me about presidential politics, but I want some explanation of the Trump years. And the explanation that I have right now is, well, most people didn't vote for it. It would be really nice if this year we could continue saying most people did not vote for this nightmare that we are subjected to every night on the horrible TV news. Sorry, Dr. Fitzgerald. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and